It's a system of genocide. It's a gladiatorial system where they play people to kill each other. Look what happened in Congo. They kill each other. The way they play it, kill each other. Imperialism is that.
Yes, I'd say it's in the most rigorous definition of the term, it's genocide. And it's a conscious genocide.
But it's happening at a much faster rate than what happened in Nazi Germany. So in a certain sense, genocide in those terms was far less efficient than what's happening in Africa.
Has been the biggest killer of our children. It has been the one delay, we lose hours of work of adults because of getting sick.
Is killing off a whole race, and in that sense, you would say this is some kind of genocide.
This is an intent to kill Africans.
Before the horrors of war, famine, and disease witnessed in Africa in the latter half of the 20th century, Lyndon LaRouche had uniquely forecast the coming disintegration of the very fabric of civilized existence as a result of intentional economic policies. That collapse would initially overtake the regions where the standard of living was relatively lower, as was the case of the African countries brutalized by the colonial powers. The inevitable conclusion of an injustice committed in the poorest regions of the world would culminate in a ruthless, chaotic implosion of all human civilization as we know it. The accuracy of this forecast demonstrates today's miscomprehended notion of economics, absurdly treating the world as a patchwork of separate competing interests, instead of recognizing the underlying unity of human action on this planet. It necessitates viewing the whole of mankind as a geological force. Human beings are a necessary evolutionary development of the solar system.
The question was, which direction are we going to go in? Are we going to go to the moon? We're going to go into space? We're going to go to high technology? We're going to get into nuclear power, thermonuclear power, fusion power, so what? Or are we going to hell? If you have one part of the world and it's inhuman, then that inhumanity becomes a characteristic of the world. If the world consents to that, then it is destroying the world.
Human thought, though intangible, invisible, and seemingly immaterial, has an indisputable physical effect on the world, which is unique relative to all other creatures and processes on Earth, and, as far as we know, the solar system. Failure to unleash human imagination and creativity, which has shown itself to be the characteristic organizing principle of our entire planet, results in total collapse. On the contrary, imperialism as a policy, represented today in the form of globalization, is by its very nature opposed to any scientific approach. This system has reduced countries, once optimistic about development and technological advancement, to raw materials exporters and, in the worst case, mere looting grounds plagued by genocidal warfare. African nations, once seeking freedom from colonial evils, have been subjugated by famine and disease. And now, this age-old British free trade system of globalization threatens to condemn the human species to an early new dark age. In a time where nations, once self-sufficient, are now dependent on external materials cartels for their existence, we are confronted with an awesome task if we are to survive this present crisis of the world economy.
The British are the only empire on the planet. That's a fact. All empires are based on monetary systems. The monetary system sits above nations, on top of them, and is relatively free of control by them. Look at the entire post-war period where Truman and Churchill organized arrangements, contrary to Roosevelt, and they set genocide into motion again. Same thing.
Every evil starts with imperialism and colonialism. In colonialism, people are not equal. Some are slaves, some are just workers, and some are, aristocrats.
In order to really understand British imperialism, you have to go back to, for example, what happened in Southern Africa, the British South Africa Company. That was a private company that had a militia, that got a charter from Queen Victoria.
The colonialism that many people don't see, but is very, very real in the sense that the finances, the economies are controlled and they're manipulated from London, Lisbon, and so forth.
The dismantling of the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971, a decision spearheaded by the British, sabotaged long-term development policies in the world's developing sector countries. With this crucial break from the world of fixed exchange rates and a gold reserve system tied to the dollar, the world embraced free trade. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank became usurious creditors, loan sharks, denying entire nations the right to credit for development and forced them to pay murderous artificial debts. Countries that were in the greatest need of loans from the World Bank for internal development underwent mandatory restructuring of their economies. This restructuring eventually overwhelmed the subject nation with debt, trapping their governments and enslaving their people. Looting enslaved nations became the trademark of British imperial policy. Today, a small handful of mining companies dominate the vast majority of mining operations on the entire African continent. In fact, the entirety of control of the world's resources today lies in the hands of a network of companies largely based within the British Commonwealth. The Commonwealth countries enjoy the unbridled extraction of resources, controlling the vast majority of raw materials minings on Earth. A look at the masters of the international raw materials trade reveals a top-down control of world resources by a small London-centered oligarchy. What has become known as globalization today was the inevitable culmination of empire. Instead of acting scientifically, society has moved towards an increasingly inefficient mode of operation as a species. Raw materials extracted in one country and shipped out to be processed in some far-off place for reasons of profit is a functionally entropic and doomed process. Under globalization, cartelized companies ship mined ores from the southern shield of Africa, a great percentage of which are unusable in the final product, over great distances, and process them far away from the source of their extraction. In this way, it requires unnecessary hours of labor and represents a net decline in efficiency of resource consumption for society as a whole. On top of this inefficient management of resources,